If you're ever wondering why it's such a difficult task to have an intellectual debate or a conversation with Sunni Muslims when it comes down to the concepts of God, theology, and the Quran, especially if you yourself is a believer who believes in God, the last day, the angels, the messengers, the books, and the prophets, it's because they're always running away from the conversation. And the reason why they're running away from the conversation is because their religion coincides to whatever they've been taught by their scholars, and they rarely reference the Quran. So when they're facing with someone like me, and I'm not part of any sect, someone who knows their theology and whatever their sect is preaching, because I grew up around it, and I'm reading the same book that they're reading, which is the Quran, but they're supposed to be reading it, but I feel like they're so busy with everything else when it comes down to history and what people are saying, and they've been blocked away from the book. So they try to run away from the conversation because unfortunately they really don't know what the Quran is preaching. And they don't know that the Quran is supposed to be applying to them and their daily life every day. And they need to see the verses in front of them. So they disengage from the conversation. But the reason why I'm doing this review is because I want to show you what I've been dealing with. For me, the concept of religion is there, and you practice it, is just so that you could take control of yourself, so that you show self-control and self-restraint. And the times when self-control is most important, or when your religion shines the most, is when you're presented with a challenge. If life is throwing a challenge at you, or if someone is challenging your beliefs or the way that you're doing things, at that point, this is when your religion shows. Because it's very easy to say you love God and you believe in God when you're comfortable at home and you have everything. But when things don't go your way, you see a lot of people start turning things back to God, that it's God's fault that things are the way they are, or that God doesn't love them because things are not going smoothly. And for people who claim that they follow the tradition of God, the tradition of the Prophet, and they call themselves Ahlus Sunnah, the people of the traditions, I find it very perplexing that when they are challenged with their faith, the way they disengage from the conversation or they handle themselves is completely opposite to what we know of the Prophet from the Quran. The Prophet had a kind heart and used to speak to people in a certain way, and he was a person that God said that he was of a high moral character and moral values. But they, on the other hand, they treat and act in a very disgusting and vile way, which is a preview to what is inside them. Of course, this does not apply to most of them, but it applies to a certain group that they consider themselves righteous and that they are very aware of what the religion is preaching, so that they go invite other people to the religion. And of course, on social media, you see a lot of these groups that they open a platform where they want to invite people and put people on their platforms, especially atheists and Christians, and discuss to them what their faith is and the belief, so that they have a discussion so that they can try to help them with some of the fundamental problems that they have in reality. In the Quran, God says that He is the reality. And therefore, we are trying to have these discussions so that we could see what the truth is, so that we get closer to God. And with those concepts, the more you can shed away from falsehood and align yourself more with what the reality is, the closer you are to God. And in return, you become a better human being. This is why people study religion, and this is why people want to go into these conversations. So they open these platforms and they call upon people to test their faith. I came to him with a certain method, which I have a friend, his name is Baba Shuaib from the Correctional Officer channel. And he recommended to me when approaching Sunnis, because he himself has also had to deal with a lot of them when it comes to the matters of theology, is do not present your position right away, because it keeps them engaged for a little bit so that maybe they can hear some of the fundamental problems that they're bringing into the religion, what they're associating to God and His messenger, which God has never allowed them to associate these things to, things that they have no authority to do, but they associate this falsehood back to God. And that's a fundamental problem in the religion, and that's a fundamental issue with things that they're assuming, which they have no proof of. So when we are presenting our topics, you should never go in and state your position, as Baba Shuaib told me, and I find that advice is very well. But here, I actually wanted to go in point blank again, because I did try to approach Ramzi a few times. And when he realizes what I'm trying to say, he will hear my question and he will say he's either tired or he doesn't want to engage in the conversation. He would take me off stage and then answer the question to his audience in a very derogatory and condescending method. And therefore, I don't have the platform to answer him on his own platform. I mean, I don't get the chance to answer him. And at the same time, he's making himself in an arrogant position and he's looking down at me when I'm not there anymore. But this time, I saw that in his channel, Dawah Over Dunya, he was making a stream where he was inviting people, the usual things that they do, but there was nobody on the stage. So I asked him point blank that if he was willing to engage with me, and I asked him by stating my position and asking if he wants to work at it. And unfortunately, it kind of showed up.
Not really. I mean, if they want to come up on the stage, I'll entertain them. But honestly, Hadith Rejecters are not my favorite people to discuss with.
So, is he here to entertain people or to talk about religion and God?
Hadith Rejecters, they love to play the game of Iblis.
Well, I mean, they're like the easiest puppet of Iblis because they quite literally rely upon their whims and desires to interpret the Quran.
So obviously, I'm telling them I do not accept whatever they say is the conversations of the Prophet, which I can't attach back to the Prophet. Neither can they, because there's only about 200 years missing. But the point that I wanted to say really quick is that we're here to talk about the Quran and what God has said in the Quran. And this is why I'm taking the position that I'm taking. It's because of verses in the Quran. But what I find when you are shaking that little fragile tree or this frail belief that they have, because the only thing that they have as proof that they're on the truth is their mob mentality, is that there's so many people around them. But they never talk about the Quran. Even on this channel, they will rarely quote the Quran except in a few places. But the Quran is set in a way so that when someone says something to you, there's an example in the Quran for you to reply. So God says, like, they said this, so say this. And of course, it's not always going to be word by word, but God is giving you the example that they're going to give you, and then he's telling you how to reply. And this is how I approach people when I am having these discussions. I just remember the verses and I go. So we're here to talk about the Quran. But what you will find, what we're dealing with, is they'll talk about everything else that they think is truth, but they will never address or rarely address the context of the Quran. Because quite simply, as God says in the Quran, the messenger will say that my people have taken the Quran forsaken, and they have forsaken the Quran. Because they will come with all this proof and all these logical understandings and all these things that's wrong with everybody else's religion, but they won't use the proof that's in the Quran. So I hit them with the thing that usually triggers them, and now we're going to see how they react. And remember, Ramzi himself loves to call his channel as an intellectual platform, where, yeah, they do bully atheists and Christians because they do have a fundamental flaw in their view on reality, and Sunni Muslims have a little edge. Again, I'm not a sectarian. I don't follow any sects. I just know their sect very well. I grew up around it.
Muhammad, are you the Hadith Rejecter?
Yeah, that's me. Apparently, I'm what is it? A toy of Satan.
I only accept the Quran. You don't accept any Hadith.
No. I don't need the Hadith in a sense for religious doctrine or understanding.
You already know.
I reject the Quran all is very concise and clear. God makes it very clear in the Quran, and the Quran is an example for everything.
So just to be clear, do you take anything from the Hadith at all?
No, not really. I don't. Last time I read the Hadith, like me going to the Hadith and reading it, was maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Just to be clear, how many times a day do you pray?
5, but it's 3 in the Quran. But I do more.
Really?
Because I want to do more. Yeah, it's 3.
Can you show us?
Yeah. Nahar was min al-layl.
One second. How many fard salah do you pray?
Just the fard is 3. Even you have 3. And let me prove it. One second.
Okay, so they asked me a question. Let me just. I already answered you. Now let me tell you why I believe what I believe.
How many rak'ah is Fajr?
But the prayer is not about the adad al-rakat. But let me prove my point after I said.
Okay, guys, everyone can see the prayer is not about. Basically, the prayer is not about anything the Prophet said. So just to be clear, you believe Hadith is to be followed,
brother.
So as soon as somebody that claims that they are a believer, because I am a believer, and I come with a different point of view and a different perspective of what I am understanding from the message of God, They are always so derogatory. They become so condescending. They are, this guy's a stupid idiot. Well, hear what I have to say. Maybe you should see the proof that I'm coming with from the Quran and maybe think for yourself. So you could see, as soon as I said something that doesn't align with what they've been told as little kids by other men. So they're saying, I follow my whims and desires. They're following the whims and desires of someone else because they can't put the reason, and they're not allowed to understand what the Quran is saying because they like to pass the idea as that you don't have the knowledge. Yet the Quran is so simple that all these people that I'm discussing with and having proper discussions about what the context is saying, we have no issues and there is no problem for us to understand what the text is saying. But they like to push it as no, it isn't. And the thing that the other thing is, when you do trigger them, it just closes them off. So now he just has to speak quickly. He's going to talk to his audience. Whatever thought that comes in his mind, he's going to say it. He's always going to interrupt me. He's still going to move his mouth. He's not going to listen because you're just in a position of being condescending at this point. And it's so easy to do because that's what you do when you close your ears. And unfortunately, this is what they did right off the bat. So now I'm just going to show you what we deal with. There is no conversation from this point on. And unfortunately, I don't know why they're talking about religion when they're sitting in this position, which they're calling themselves of an authority of someone who's calling towards the religion of God, which is a universal religion. But they treat people like in this manner. People who believe in this book.
Answer something.
No, you can't make. You're not my akhi. Excuse me. How many?
Of course I'm not.
No.
Let me answer you, but you need to listen when I'm talking.
I need to understand your position. Do you take anything from hadith?
So how are you going to understand my position if you don't let me speak?
Hadith.
I already told you no.
None. So
we can completely. There's a verse in the Quran that states it very clear that the prayer تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر. So prayer stops you from doing
prayers.
Okay, great. That doesn't tell you.
Here's the thing.
We're familiar with that verse.
Just hold on.
We're familiar with the verse.
Okay, so let me explain my position before you.
Ramsey, let him explain.
So even if someone followed your recipe of what you consider as prayer, right? They go to the mosque and they do exactly what you're saying step by step, but then he leaves the mosque right after the prayer and smokes a cigarette. Essentially, that man didn't pray. So it's not about the actual chronological order of what you're saying is the recipe of prayer. That's why the book of the Quran is a guidance. It's not structured.
Okay,
so that's the point that I'm making, is there's a lot of Christians and Jews and all sorts of other monotheistic religions that believe in God, that God said that some of them are going to heaven. But for them to be a religious group and go to heaven, they need to pray. And their way of prayer is not the same as what Sunni Muslims pray. But it's about the internal. It's about how you're connecting to God, and the physical activity is promoting that. So the bowing down, the prostration and standing up is promoting that connection inside. It's showing that humility and humbleness. But to them, it's about the physical activity and whatever's going inside. That's between you and God. But that's not what the prayer is. The prayer is about the physical activity. But the point that I made is very easy. The point of the prayer is to remember God. But if you're not remembering God while you're praying, then you're going to do the evil things and obscenities. Because you remembering God, you will stop the evil obscenity and the obscenities. It will help you not masturbate. It will help you not destroy your body. It will help you not talk to people in a certain way, because you're always thinking about the objective truth, which is there's a day of judgment. So I have to watch out what I'm saying and what I'm doing. That's the point of the prayer. And to kind of explain another point that I said to them, when it's the 3, not the 5. So there's 2 verses in the Quran. The first verse that I want to say is that God said, perform the prayer from the 2 ends of the day and then a portion of the night. So that's 3. And then there's another verse that states that when you are praying, when you do stand to perform the prayer, do not be loud in your prayer and do not be low in your prayer. Do not be quiet in your prayer, but find the middle path when you're praying. So they have 5 prayers. They have the morning prayer before sunrise. They have the noon, afternoon, right? And then they have their sunset prayer and their evening prayer. Now, if you go to the group setting when they're praying as a group, they will say the morning prayer out loud. The noon and afternoon, they will not say it out loud, which is going against the Quran. And then their sunset prayer, they say out loud. And the evening prayer, they say out loud. How many is that? That's 3 that coincides with what the Quran is saying. So that was the proof I was trying to present to him. But of course, they don't let you say anything because they're such condescending, arrogant individuals with the faith that they have that's been passed on by the other people who followed their whims and desires.
So what do you consider?
Hadith is useless to you.
Hadith is just history. Hadith has got nothing to do with religion.
So if we find your religious doctrine in the Hadith, do you accept it?
What do you mean by
Change the
religious doctrine? There is no religious doctrine other than the Quran.
If we find you something the Prophet said about the Deen, which is not in the Quran.
That's not from the Prophet, no God. It would have been in the Quran.
Yeah, you're a Hadith rejecter then. You're a Hadith rejecter.
I've been telling you that.
It's not what's, brother, when it comes to Hadith, it's literally what's convenient for you. It's optional. The whole thing is optional to you. There's no Hadith that you have to do. There's 10 rak'ats for Dhuhr, but the 4 is fard. The other 6 is optional.
Yeah, because the Prophet said they're optional, not because I want them to be optional.
So it's optional.
Anyway, look, they're very simple. Muhammad, very simple. Is there anything very simple? If the Prophet tells us about the Judgment Day in the Quran, in the Hadith, do you take that or do you reject it?
For the first 200 years, no, rejected.
I just
but for the
answered
first
him.
200 years,
Remember that.
in Islam, that was always
I
called.
said no.
I ask you about the first 200 years of Islam. I'm just asking you about the Hadith.
I already said no, and I'm explaining to
doesn't
you
listen.
why.
Then you're a Hadith reject. You reject Hadith.
I already told you that 14 times, but you just want to repeat the point.
No,
I don't know what
asked you
conclusion
before,
he's trying to reach, but I'll tell you what's going on with him, because I had the same problem with other Sunni Muslims when you're trying to talk to them. They'll repeat the same question over and over again. And usually in a debate or a discussion, someone will ask you a question. I'll answer that question, say why I answered it that way, and then I'll ask you a question. And then you have to do the same. That's how a normal discussion works or a debate works, right? But for them, it's because they're rude, they'll ask you a question, they'll take your quick answer, and then they just want to keep asking you another question, usually based upon the answer that you said. But here he's crushed because he's expecting somehow in his mind that I would say, yeah, I would take some of them, because he thinks that I'm going to give some respect to the words of the Prophet, when in reality they got nothing to do with the Prophet. The Prophet didn't tell them to write any of this stuff down. But he's not getting the answer that, so he gets stuck. And that loop in his mind starts to begin. Oh, so you reject the hadith? What about this hadith? Do you reject this one? What about this one? Do you reject this one? So, and I had the problems like Shamsi before in a different debate you could find on my channel. Oh, where's Mecca? Where's Mecca? Where's Mecca? Where's Mecca? Where's Mecca? Because they're stuck in their mind. They just can't escape. And they do not want to talk about what the Quran is saying. And this is what he's doing. And this is his tactics that they always repeat. They'll ask you a question waiting for you to slip in something so they can capture it. The thing he's waiting for me to slip is to say that, yeah, there's some hadith I will take, which is no way the Quran is enough for me. It's a clear, concise, complete book with examples for everything. This is what God said in the Quran. And I find that in reality. This is how I know it's from God. But to them, it's not enough.
Do you completely disregard hadith? You said no. I believe everything in the hadith is in the Quran, as if the hadith you accept.
That's not what I said. That's not what I said at all.
You did say that. You did. You said
That's
everything in the
Where did I
hadith.
say that whatever is in the hadith isn't? No, I said whatever is religious is in the Quran. Everything else outside of that is not religion. The
Okay,
religion that we're supposed to follow is in the Quran.
So if we
The
find a hadith,
understanding of religion.
just to be clear, if we find a hadith that we can trace back to the Prophet that tells us something about religion, you don't care.
But that is for the first 200 years in Islam. That was called Biyanul Dhanni, Burhanul Dhanni. So it's only an assumption. It's a pre-assumption of its truth because you haven't witnessed it. But the Quran is the truth. So no, I wouldn't take it.
Witness that.
You did not hear my question. You did not hear my question.
No, I will not take it because it's not from the Prophet. I would not attribute that to the Prophet.
So the first 200 years after the Prophet Muhammad, there was many sects that came out, or many understandings. And yes, some of them were sects. And for example, there's one that's called the Mu'tazila, which used reason and not tradition for understanding the religion. That was actually for quite some time the main sect of what they would call as Islam. But when Shafi'i came 200 years after, and these books of hadith was written 200 years after, and the government accepted Shafi'i and those people were the puppets of the government of the time, they erased the rest of the history so that no one can refer to it. So all the books of the Mu'tazila, they're no longer around. All the books of the other sects that came before Shafi'i, they're no longer around. What are you trying to hide? But they themselves don't consider that, because what they're taught is all those people that came after Prophet Muhammad within those 200 years, they're all righteous as long as they said they're Muslims, that they would never lie. that they would not attribute things to the Prophet which are not true, that they're also good and righteous and honest people, which is never the case in humanity. You can't have 3 generations of people of all of them being righteous when you can't even tell who's the hypocrite or who's the one working just for money. But they like to paint that image, which goes against what reality is. And that's where they have to start now playing their games to cover those 200 years, saying, no, it's the people were so trustworthy. And this is the trap that they fell in. But yeah, 200 years, for a lot of people, whatever people say that the Prophet said, it was just an assumption, because you yourself haven't heard it. You yourself haven't met those people that you're referencing. So I could just sit here and say, Abu Hurairah said that the Prophet used to drive his car in the morning to work. Oh, okay, yeah, that's not in the context. But as long as if I give you a valid chain that other people, then it doesn't matter the context. That's what was said. And this is how they work.
One second, you didn't hear my question. If we find an authentic statement of the Prophet that we can trace back to the Prophet,
you can't trace it to the
about
Prophet.
religion that is not in the Quran.
Ramzi, when you're saying you can trace it back to the Prophet, that's only your testimonial that other people said.
It's a question, not an assertion.
No, because it's not. It is an assertion because that's not possible for you to trace it back to the Prophet.
Okay, how do we trace the Quran back to the Prophet?
Brother, it's not about here. We go with the whole question about preservation. The 3 questions they ask.
No, it's a fair question. It's a fair question. How do you trace the Quran back to the Prophet?
It's not a fair question. That's
it's
what
the context of the
disbeliever
Quran
asks.
that matters.
It's
That
not
I
the
know it's
context. It's
godly.
not the context. It has nothing
It
to
is
do
the
with
con-
context.
Brother,
How do you trace?
Guys, for the last 1400 years, the people who accepted the Quran, it wasn't because of their magic chain that they talk about, saying that there's a science to prove on how it's been passed down from a person to person, and that they needed to make a science, and this science is there to tell you that what is weak and who lied and who's being accurate and who's the one who forgets a lot. Okay, so this is what they're calling as a science, so that they have a scientific method to observe who's the liar or not. The problem is, when it comes to a scientific method, the opposite of what a scientific method is, or a scientific approach, is data gained by testimonials. This is what the opposite thing of what a scientific process is. So their whole thing is based upon testimonial. So there is no science. There is no truth to what they're saying, other than a lot of us saying it. And if you don't like it, then you're a kafir. You're a disbeliever, that you're going to hell.
Said back to the Prophet. Please answer the question. How do you trace the Quran?
question.
Since you are throwing all the hadith down the toilet,
Where they
how
belong.
do you trace
Guys,
the
I
Quran
swear
back
to
to the
God, I
Prophet?
swear to God, I've been on this path for 13 years. These questions I'm asked every time. When you're over explaining,
Help me out.
Answer it. Then
Then
answer
let
it.
me
You've been on
answer.
13 years on it.
Hold on, you
No,
ignored the
but-
question. It's not about that. Don't tell me what it's about. How do you trace the
brother,
Quran back to the
let
Prophet?
me
The people
answer.
believed in the
How do
Quran
you
because of the
trace the Quran back?
context.
To the
Okay,
Prophet.
To me, that's irrelevant. Let me explain
I don't care
why.
if it's irrelevant. Answer me how. Preserving the Quran to you is relevant. I know.
Guys, the question he's asking, a disbeliever asks. God said that one of the miracles that he's going to do is preserve this Quran. That word cannot be broken. They as Muslims have to believe the word of God. I am referencing the word of God to a Muslim, to a believer, that God said he is going to miraculously preserve this book, which is clearly preserved, right? But now they want me to explain how a miracle is done. Okay, so in Arabic, there's the word ayah, which is used in the Quran as a miracle, which is a clear proof of God's existence or God's direct intervention into this physical world, right? But there's also a common word that people use for miracle, which is mu'jiza. It's not, you can't find that in the Quran, but we use the word mu'jiza for a miracle, which has the root word of ajiz or i'jaz, which means that however much you're going to try to understand and how something is done, you can't. It's just going to crumble you. It's going to exhaust you. It's going to destroy you, you trying to understand how it's done. So now he's asking me to prove to him how, or to explain to him how God has preserved the Quran. That's him asking me how a miracle was done. Just because it's preserved in front of you, it isn't because of these people that you like to quote. It's God preserving it. Even if those people never existed, that book will be preserved however God wants to preserve it. Him asking how is the craziest question I get from Sunni Muslims. You're asking a disbeliever question. Just because a disbeliever, a Christian or an atheist asks you that question and he wasn't satisfied with your answer, because none of them ever are satisfied with your answer as a proof of preservation. You asking me that question, you became them at that moment. So you're not showing loyalty to God's verses.
Because the Quran must have been preserved some way, shape, or form, right?
You guys don't want to let me speak?
I ask you if you think it's relevant. I don't care about your opinion.
But just follow the sunnah that you talk about and let me speak kindly. Just be calm.
You already said you reject the sunnah.
Yeah, I reject what you're saying, but you believe it. Follow it.
One second. I didn't ask you about your opinion, whether you think it's relevant or not. You're not relevant to me.
Can I answer the question and then berate me?
Question, don't ignore the question. The question is,
let me answer then.
You, ya Ahl al-Bid'ah, trace the Quran back to the Prophet. I'd like to know. I don't care if you...
When he's calling me Ahlul Bid'ah, in their own books, their narrations, they say that one of their rightful caliphs, Omar, right? And in their narrations, supposedly, allegedly, that Omar came up with a tradition after the Prophet Muhammad has passed away, after Prophet Muhammad has left the world. He made up a tradition during the months of Ramadan for people, instead of praying by themselves after the evening prayer, to pray as a group. To pray as a group with a person leading the prayer. And then he came later to check on whatever he ruled, and he told the man next to him, allegedly, that this is khairul bid'ah, which is like a clear, great innovation. And he's here now calling me people of innovation. Well then, if that's a problem, because he's using it in a derogatory term, because that's what they're taught, that ahlul bid'ah is always a derogatory thing. So he's using it as an insult to me, but he technically called Caliph Omar in a derogatory way, if those stories are real, which whatever, but he put him in the same boat because he believes on those things. And again, I don't have a problem with Caliph Omar. He doesn't affect me in any way. I mean, like him on the day of judgment is not going to change anything. Whatever good he did, he's going to find on the day of judgment. Whatever I did, I'm going to find on the day of judgment. If he did do things that do affect me on the day of in the day that I'm living in now, it's gonna only benefit him. It won't benefit me on the day of judgment. I have no problem with Omar. I don't know who Omar is. Omar was not talked about in the Quran. Abraham doesn't know who Omar is, and I follow Abraham. So they love to talk about these people, yet when he's insulting me, he's insulting these people that they love and talk about and reference all the time. So maybe they should watch what they're saying when they're saying things to people.
Ramzi, calm down.
I'm going to be quiet now. I'm going to hear his methodology, how he traces the Quran back to the Prophet. I'll be quiet now.
So when it comes down to the Quran, the word of God, because of the context, it's very clear that it's godly, that it came from God. Now, the book that claims that it's preserved, right? You could see that it's preserved because the credibility is all around the world around you. All these verses apply to everybody, not just Muslims. A.
What?
B, just 1 second. B, the Quran itself, the preservation of that book is a miracle. There is no other book in history, including your hadith books, have been preserved the exact same as the Quran. Because in narrations, they have multiple narrations about the same story, but that's not evident in the Quran. So when you're asking me, prove to me how the Quran has been preserved, is literally you asking me, prove to me that Jesus has no father. Prove to me how Moses split the ocean.
Why do you have to bring Jesus into the picture?
Because you're not listening.
See, what happens with people who associate falsehoods to God, their mind becomes sealed. And there's an example in the Quran that God says that those that associate with God things that are not true, they're like someone who's falling from the sky and the wind takes them left and right, or a bird captures them. And this is how they are. Like if you observe Neil, how he was in the last little bit, he's not focusing. He's looking at things, and then trigger words, he gets triggered, he involves himself a little bit, and then his mind goes into these tangents, and and then another trigger word. So it's like he saw Ramzi go like, like, what do you mean? And then Neil goes, oh, trigger, look, he's confused, he's my friend. What? Because you're not listening. And then he goes back on his tangent, and he's looking away, he's thinking about things, he's not listening, and then he hears Jesus. Oh, trigger word. What's Jesus got to do with it? We're not talking about Jesus, because you're not listening. But this is the problem with people who associate falsehood to God, thinking that they're right. God seals their ears. They can't hear. They can't listen. The only thing that fixes this is them recognizing that they can't listen. So they need to stop, calm down, Stop talking, stop even thinking, and just listening. Capture what he says, see what he says, picture it in your mind, and then think about it. But they're just, as God said, they're just like on a wave. Just, trigger word. Oh, something else. Hey, this not. I don't like this. Okay, let me listen to this, man. Oh, one word, two words. Oh, wait, two words. This over there, and they're gone. That's how it goes with these people. They just don't listen. And that's the problem that God is talking about the Quran when it comes to who? People who associate falsehoods to God.
You're asking
we're listening, bro.
I know. Let him finish.
You're
Remember,
asking
he said he's not
how
gonna
to prove how the miracle is done.
20 more seconds, okay? 20 more seconds.
How it has been preserved?
You're asking?
Just let him finish. Don't interrupt him. Let him finish.
Ramsey, you're just talking and he's talking. You guys literally not listening. The only person who's actually
We are listening.
is law.
Well, Akhi, I'm telling you.
I've been listening a lot, and what I found is that just made
the
them
miracle of the preservation. The preservation of the Quran is a miracle. When you're asking how, it's exactly like asking how Jesus has no father or how Moses split the ocean. There is no how when it comes to a miracle.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. How did the Quran come in a book form?
No, guys.
How the Quran? That's a valid question.
One second. Muhammad, in order to say the Quran's preservation is a miracle, you have to prove it's preserved, yeah?
No, you don't. That's the point.
How do you know it's a miracle? How do you know it's a miracle?
How
do you know Jesus had no father?
Because the preserved Quran, which we can prove was preserved, says it.
But that's the point, is the fact the Quran's preservation is
how do you
a miracle.
How can you prove that?
But how? The question is how. You can say
asking how to prove a
100 times.
Okay,
but
guys,
how? How can you prove it?
You literally said, I don't need to prove how, but it's a miracle. Habibi,
you know something? Muhammad, you're doing exactly. Muhammad, hold on, Muhammad, you're doing exactly what the Christians do. You're using circular reasoning here. You're using circular reasoning.
How is that circular reasoning?
They say that I'm using circular reasoning when I am invoking the book that they believe in, that I believe in. I'm using God's words, God's word as a reference. I'm saying God said that he preserved this book. Me referencing their Lord is circular reasoning, that God's testimony and God's words is not enough. They want me to prove to them that God's word is truth, as if they don't believe that God's word is truth. Do they understand what they are saying at this point? They're going to call me names later on, which is applying perfectly on them. They're asking me questions that a disbeliever says, and then me referencing God's book is not enough for them. God's word is not enough for them. God saying that I preserved this book is not good enough. That's circular reasoning. Referencing God is circular reasoning.
It's very clear. I'm telling you, how did Jesus get made without a father? You're saying, oh, it's because the Quran said it. When I'm telling
you're going to say because of God, right? You're going to say because of God.
Guys, one second. Muhammad, the Quran, why do we believe Jesus has no father? Because the preserved Quran, which we can prove is preserved, says he is.
Tell me how. How does he have no father?
Excuse me. Habibi, I'm not asking you how Allah created the. What's
You're asking how did God preserve the Quran?
That is a stupid question. It's like you're revolving the same question that you asked, bro. We can play this game all day, man. How Adam has no father and mother? Tell us how Adam.
Neil, 1 second. Muhammad, 1 second. Let's say there's a non-Muslim who says the Quran is preserved. Is the Quran preserved? What would you say to him?
Yeah, it is.
That's a non-Muslim. Are you a non-Muslim, Ramzi?
What's your evidence?
My evidence is come look at the context.
What does that mean? Look at the context.
The context is.
What does that mean?
Let's give Saifullah a chance, bro.
What does that mean? Look at the context.
Let's analyze the book. See why it's from God.
How does that prove the book is preserved?
If it's all from God, then it's preserved.
Okay, how many chapters? One second. How many chapters in the Quran?
114.
How do you know there wasn't a 115th chapter?
Because at that point, then it would have been preserved.
How do you know there's a... Wallahi, this guy's...
You know that the Shias claim,
No, you're straw manning.
No, we're not straw manning.
They are straw manning.
You need to listen.
They're straw manning because God gives multiple evidence in the Quran why it's from God. So God says that if this was from someone other than God, right, that they would find a lot of contradictions in it. That's one point. God said that God explains what God is and who God is in a very clear and perfect, precise way. That's another reason why it's from God. God says that this book is also confirming the other books that are saying that they're from God, i.e. the Gospel and the Torah. Another reason why it's from God. God said that if you don't think this is from God, produce something of it, the same of it, just one chapter that's similar to it. That's another reason. So there's multiple reasons why it's from God. And I've given them many of these reasons that are in the Quran why it is from God. And what they do is straw man. So what a straw man is, there's multiple reasons why it's from God. They will pick one reason and say, well, another book has it, therefore what you're saying is not true. God in the Quran said that this book is from God, because if it wasn't from God, it'll have a lot of contradictions. And oh, you said that? Well, other people say that too. Or I can find another book that... But that's not the point, because you're a Muslim, you know it's from God. So what are you arguing? You're arguing against the word of God at this point to prove to me that I need the hadith.
To listen. How do you know?
I can say your position very easily, but you're not hearing me. You're saying there's 114
bro,
verses.
you're going on the run-on
sentence, bro. The 114 chapter.
See, there's a tactic that I use with these people, and it's because I know God has sealed their ears and their ears. They can't listen. I am listening. I understand what they're saying and I'm answering them, right? But they, because they're just like so hyper, it's like a kid on sugar. Just, oh, trigger. I can't listen because I'm just talking. How can you listen when you talk? I have a tactic with them. If they tell me that I'm not listening, because I constantly tell them they're not listening, if they say it to me, I say, this is the last point that you made, or these are the last 2 points that you made. Here's a professional summary of what you're saying. This is what I am understanding. Okay, and they usually agree that yeah, he is listening. But then I'll say, what did I just say? What's the last point that I made? And they can't, because they're just going crazy.
Today, you said we can analyze it. It's all from God. How can you prove to us that it was originally 114, not 115?
Because the Quran didn't come with one line saying that this book is preserved. There's many verses, 6,000 verses, right? And if 5,000 verses are correct that you could see in front of you and you could test them and analyze them.
What about the other becomes
How do you test them? How do you test them?
You see, they don't, how do you test them? Because you see it in the reality in front of you. You're a perfect example. God said that those don't listen become deaf, dumb, and blind. They're not guided. You can't get guided because you're not listening. This is a perfect example of one of the verses that's in the Quran. God has a lot of verses that applies to people in Japan, in Middle East, in Africa, in Europe. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. The verses are applying on humanity the exact same. You could see that. That is what reality is. God is explaining that reality in the Quran. That's many of the verses. And he's talking about history on how people reacted to people like this, so that you could see it, you could test it and feel it and go with it. And if you go with what the Quran is telling you as a response, you see how it works, because they just crumble in front of you. They crumble. The word of God is destroying them, which is literally what's happening here. But they don't see it because, of course, they're just like so happy with what they have. But here's the thing. I said there's like, let's say that 5,000 verses that you could observe and the other verses you can't observe. And he goes, oh, well, why not? It's because it's talking about the day of judgment. That's things that are going to happen. Those are the articles of faith. So if God is giving you 10 things, right? So God listed to you 10 things. 8 of the things you could observe them and they're true and they're repeatable and it's very accurate, right? 8 of them. Let's say one of the verses is saying, I preserved this book, which now you are seeing it. Well, he was accurate about 8 things. Obviously, this is going to happen and now it did happen. So I know it's truth. And then God's saying, well, there's a day of judgment. And that day of judgment, I'm going to resurrect you. And I'm going to judge you for who you are, for how you acted and how you treated everyone in the world and everything in the world. And I'm going to account you for everything. Any good you do, I'm going to multiply it. Any bad things you do, it's going to be on you. And if you didn't believe on me and you became a criminal and you cut your ties, then you're going to answer for that. So those are those verses. He goes, well, what about the rest of the verses? You can't even prove the rest of the verses because they have yet to happen. Those are the faith. But guys, they don't listen.
Because you're circular reasoning.
Invoking God is circular reasoning to them.
You haven't interrupted, Muhammad. You haven't interrupted. I've been listening this whole time. Brother, I've been listening this whole time. You have complained about being interrupted like 5 times, and you have interrupted like 10 times. Come on, Izan. I'm listening currently.
Okay, Ramsey's fake laugh is demeaning, but whatever. He can fake laugh. But what Saif said there was actually profound. Like, I took his advice. What he said was very, very correct. You know, I liked his advice and I took it. He said, if you don't like being interrupted, then don't interrupt. You know what? He said truth. I will stop interrupting so that, you know what, they can interrupt each other at that point, or let them show who they really are on an intellectual level, on an intellectual platform. So I took his advice and I stopped talking so that I don't interrupt him. But this is why I have these numbers on the screen now. Because Saifullah said that I was interrupting more than they were interrupting me. So I just put the numbers just if Saifullah ever watches this so that he could see that, no, you know what, this group of people that you're with are not about God, but they're about entertainment, as he said in the beginning, because it seems like he's just entertained now, Ramzi. You could see it clearly in his face with his fake laugh and his fake demeanor at this point, because they're not honest people. You shouldn't do things that you're not honest about. Even your feelings, God knows your feeling. At this point, Ramzi is going to see this on the day of judgment. He's going to think to himself, it wasn't funny. Saifullah was giving advice. He wasn't being a comedian as you are, Ramzi.
But if you're gonna complain about being interrupted, don't interrupt.
It's a good
fine. You're right.
Not a lot. Okay, look,
Ramzi
Muhammad,
even agreed, but Ramzi didn't take his advice.
This question is like a thorn in your side.
No,
preservation of the Quran, because
it's a
you
thorn
can't
in your
demonstrate
side because
the
you
Quran
disbelieved in God.
You want to keep insisting. I know you just want to insist it is because you don't want to be held accountable on anything. We, alhamdulillah, Ahl al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, not Ahl al-Bid'ah, Ahl al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we can demonstrate the Quran is preserved. You have no criteria to prove that. I swear to God, the Christians use the exact same nonsense you use. Oh, it's preserved just
You're
because,
the one that acted
you know
like
what,
the Christians.
it's godly. Habibi.
And no, not all the Christians are bad, but
every
you're acting
person
like
tells
the
us
bad
that their book is godly. Christians tell us their book is godly.
Let's
Hindus tell us their
compare.
book is
Let's
godly.
compare.
How can you prove
the Quran with the Bible?
Methodology. I
How
asked
can
you.
you demonstrate it? That's the question.
You didn't give one. You just said, "Well, it's godly." Habibi, we're Muslims.
Exactly. Just saying it's just a miracle. You know, it's using Christian logic. It's circular reasoning.
This is why. Honestly, I think a lot of you guys are Christian missionaries in what's it called in
disguise.
Because you use the same Holy Spirit. Oh, yeah, well, you know, it's. How do you know there wasn't 115 chapters? Well, yeah, because it wouldn't be preserved. How do you know it's preserved? Because we know
God
it's preserved.
said it's preserved.
It's miraculous. Okay, how do you know there wasn't something missing? Well, because it's miraculous. Sir,
you know, Muhammad. Have you ever spoken to a Shia? A 12er?
So can I answer or no?
Have you ever spoken to a 12er Shia?
5 minutes.
So fun for you. So when it comes down, when a Christian tells me that, oh, their book is preserved because...
So I gave them their time. I didn't interrupt them. I asked if I can speak, and let's see if they interrupt me.
It's a miracle of God. When I find them a contradiction and say, you see, this is a contradiction here. There's a problem with the context, with the text. Therefore, it's not from God. But you can't do that with the Quran. So your point is...
Muhammad, they claim the same thing about the Quran too. For so many times they come and say, well, I found 10 contradictions in the Quran.
Guys, one second.
If a book is, do you find any contradiction? Not forget the Christian. Do you find any contradictions with the Quran? Okay, so I have to. You're here just to talk at me.
Hold on.
I'm
responding to your point. If a book has no contradictions, is it automatically from God?
That's a straw man again.
If the book is saying that it's from God and it has no contradictions, and I can see it in reality, at that point it's from God.
Can you find? I mean,
wait a minute. Hold on. If Dr. Seuss wrote The Cat in the Hat, and there's no contradictions in The Cat in the Hat, and he wrote, "This is from God," and then he wrote the book. Is it from God now?
Well, at that point, I have to see if it applies on my life and it applies to the world in front of me.
That's subjective. That's subjective.
Okay, but here's the problem. God is the truth. So you cannot produce truth other than if God shows you that truth. وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ عِلْمِهِ إِلَّا بِمَا شَاءَ. You cannot encompass a little bit of knowledge from God except from what he wills. God is the truth. So for you to say the truth, God has led you to that truth. If Dr. Seuss came up with a book that didn't contradict itself and he wrote truth in it, he himself would not be able to produce that truth other than if God guided him. So technically, yes, God said the truth through this man. Is this man a messenger? Obviously not. Is this man enlightened from some truth of God? Yes, because even the atheists, the Christians, the Hindus, whoever you want to invoke in the world, whoever says truth, it's because God guided him to that truth. Even when the devil said truth to God, he said that I'm going to delude them, right? Except a certain portion. God said, وَالْحَقُّ بِالْحَقِّ أَقُولُ. So he said the truth in the truth. the truth, within the truth, I will say the truth. He is the one who's saying the truth. It doesn't mean the devil's a messenger of God. No, God allowed the devil to understand that principle, so it's used against him on the day of judgment. Yeah, if Dr. Seuss wrote a book and it, regardless if it didn't have contradictions, if it said the truth came from God at that point, because God is the truth. But these concepts, they will not attach back to God. They will not attach the truth back to God, but they will go attach the falsehood back to God and saying, oh, you don't believe it, then you're crazy. I'm telling you what the Quran says. God is the truth.
Subjective truth.
The message of Muhammad,
but realize we still haven't talked about a single verse. This is a people who call towards God.
Objective.
The
message
is subjective.
You say the prophet is subjective.
You didn't know that. I didn't. You don't listen. You don't listen.
We are listening. We are listening.
Then what did I say? Then what did I? It's recorded. What did I say?
Tell us, how is the prophet subjective? How is the prophet subjective?
You see, you don't listen.
That's a loaded claim, bro.
Listen. That's not what I said.
You said it clearly.
May God damn me if I said that.
Being recorded.
May God damn me if I said that. May God damn you if you're lying.
So the point that I was making. So, and there's a reason why I'm calling it damnation at this point, because I had enough of them. These are people who are supposed to be righteous, pious people who are calling towards the religion of God. They're presented with another person who's a believer in the same book that they're talking about when there's only one God that I'm believing in. I'm here to discuss these concepts with him. And all they did was interrupt me and treat me in a bad way. And now they're acting really vile because I said something that they didn't understand, and now they're trying to say certain things about me, which I didn't say. I said the message of Prophet Muhammad is subjective, okay? The prophecy of Prophet Muhammad is objective. So the message is subjective while the prophecy is objective. So Prophet Muhammad, the messenger Muhammad, when he was sent to the Arabians 1400 years ago, they had a specific problem which God is warning them about. This specific problem of having multiple rock idols and whatnot, and how they were treating each other, God is removing these people because of who they became. So it's subjective to these group of people, right? But after God destroyed them, he made them an example and a prophecy for anyone else that if you're gonna act like this, or like the other people that God has destroyed in the Quran, right? You are gonna get destroyed. Now that's objective reality. That became the prophecy. That's objective truth. And the other thing, God talks about the book in the Quran, and then he talks about the Quran in the Quran. So there's two concepts that are different, which they're not taught. When God is talking about something called a book, he's not talking about the Quran. And when he's talking about the Quran, he's talking about the Quran. So I hit him with an example saying that God will teach Jesus, and remember, the Quran is a book of examples. You use that example and then you apply it to where it fits later on. So God said that he teaches Jesus the book, the wisdom, the Torah, and the gospel. So God has made a difference, right, between the gospel and the Torah and what the book is. So the book is who you are as a person, what you're supposed to do, right? And the book, it applies to people differently. That's the subjective nature of the book. That's the subjective nature of the message. So if Prophet Muhammad was reciting a verse of the a surah of the Quran, right, a chapter of the Quran, I would hear certain verses while you're hearing like other verses, and you're paying attention to certain verses while I'm paying attention to different things. And I end up being a warrior and you end up being a lawyer, for example. So this is the subjective nature of the message applying to people in different ways. That's why it's subjective. But when it comes to the prophecy, when Prophet Muhammad is prophesying, saying to us that there's a day of judgment, and on this day of judgment, you need to present yourself in a satisfactory way to God so that you get permitted into heaven and live forever there. If not, the other option is you're going to be in pain because you were not permitted to this amazing place. So you're going to burn for not being able to go there. So this is objective truth at this point. We're all heading to the same objective. It is the reality, so it's objective reality, right? So this is the difference between what a prophecy is and what a message is. They know this. He understands that the message is subjective based on a person. I explained this to him, and you will see that I will explain this to him. He agrees. And this is the point where at this part, God allowed him to grasp some of what I'm saying so that it is used against him on the day of judgment, that I did tell him the truth, that he did agree. And then what he does, he lies. He wants to say that I said that the Quran or the message that came out of Prophet Muhammad was subjective from the Prophet, which is not what I said. But this is what they're trying to like, oh no, crazy. But they can't even listen.
No, may Allah damn you for calling his prophet subjective.
And the reason why I invoke the damnation, as I said, is because these people are supposed to be righteous. But at this point, they're showing a disgrace of what God is talking about in the Quran. They're doing the opposite of what God is telling them into the Quran. And at this point, I really did have enough of them. And I usually don't go down that route. But let them enjoy what they're building.
That's not what I said. I said the message of Prophet Muhammad, the message of Muhammad is subjective.
That's even worse.
What do you mean? Isn't the Quran the message of the Prophet?
That's even worse. That was helping.
No. Isn't the Quran the message of the Prophet?
The message. Let me finish. The message of Prophet
Clarify.
Muhammad. I'm clarifying, but the message of Prophet Muhammad.
You're very disrespectful and condescending, man.
You're
very disrespectful and condescending. When you say the message of the Prophet is subjective, what do you mean? And then you say the Quran is
finish the sentence, which I already said.
You are creating. You're
shut up,
creating
man. Let me say it. Just say it. Let me say it. The message of Prophet Muhammad is subjective. The prophecy of Prophet Muhammad is objective. Does that make sense?
Okay. What was the message of Muhammad?
The message of Muhammad, okay, is when it comes down to what you're calling as Sunnah.
Oh, really?
Oh my
God! But the prophecy is the objective truth that's in front of you.
Bro, you're just
wasn't the Quran the message?
No, the Quran is not the message.
Look at this imbecile, bro.
Yeah. This is what you're doing. You're the imbecile. You guys called me a tool of Satan. You guys sat there and just berated.
Oh, come on! You're a Christian missionary in disguise, bro.
Guys, 1 second.
Now you're
assuming. Everybody. Quote of the year from Hadith Rejecters. The prophethood of Muhammad is subjective.
That's not what I said.
Sorry, what was? I'm sorry. You're right.
The message of Muhammad is subjective.
The message of the prophet.
Risala.
Yeah.
Risala. Subjective.
Wait a minute. What do you call?
See, because of their attitude and the way they act, this is why their countries are in shambles. This is why there is no more Khalifa. This is why God doesn't seem like they're helping them. One of the worst countries in the world that you can live in is North Africa and Middle East. Is because the society there are completely broken. The governments are very vindictive. Their governments are corrupt. The people inside are empty. They talk a lot. They mention the name of God a lot, but internally they're so bad because whatever they inherited as a religion has not taught them the proper morals that is listed in the Quran. So this is how they act. But to everyone else, they always like to put that pious image that the Jews do. You understand me? The Jews and the Christians do the same things. They'll come to you in an image that they're so righteous and whole. But when you start to discuss to them things that are important, their true nature starts to come out. What it is inside them starts to show. And this is what happened with them. If these people are so confident with what they believe in, they would never act that way. Because it doesn't matter what the person's saying in front of me. If I know it's the truth, I'll let him speak. But maybe he would benefit me if he is saying something that does benefit me, so let me listen. It doesn't matter where it's coming from at that point. The falsehood is falsehood, and that's clear. And the truth is truth. That's very clear.
Risala. What do you call Risala, please?
Stop, guys. What's up?
Look it up.
Guys, everyone.
No. Ramsey, let me deal with this clown. You say look it up. No, you are the one who's making the loaded statements here, my bro.
You're the clown.
Tell us, how is the Risala subjective?
Okay.
You just made the claim.
Tawheed is the message of Prophet Muhammad.
So when God said to Jesus about Jesus,
please don't bring Jesus into the picture. You're talking about the Prophet Muhammad. Please be consistent. Have consistency. How?
I'm staying a verse of the Quran.
Oh, how? Please tell us, how is it subjective?
When kuffar say the Quran, we don't have respect for them, if that makes sense. But anyway,
I know you don't have no respect for the Quran.
The message of the Prophet Muhammad is not subjective. Did I quote you correctly?
So he asked me to prove my claim, and then you're shouting at me. I'm trying to say a verse from the Quran and got interrupted.
No. How is it? Please give us your explanation of the tafsir of the Quran by the Quran, as the Quran rejectors do.
He's giving his own homemade tafsir. I don't take homemade tafsir. I don't take my homemade tafsir from kuffar.
So God said in the Quran, وَيُعَلِّمَهُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةُ وَالتَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. He said this about Jesus. So God's going to teach him the book and the wisdom and the Torah and Injil. Therefore, there's a difference between what the book is and what the Torah and Injil is. You see, there's a difference.
We don't disagree.
Okay, perfect.
How does that prove? Wait. Okay, how does that prove? How does that prove that the message the Prophet Muhammad brought was subjective?
Because the book, what that book is, that's what makes it subjective. Everyone has their own destiny and their own.
Wait a minute.
Neil, just let him finish. Let him finish.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll mute myself.
27 interrupts later.
Is what's subjective to the person's destiny and what he needs to do as serving God. The Tawrat wal Injil is the Sharia. That's the objective of what needs to be done as a community. The Quran is bringing.
How that proves your point.
Okay, now I'm applying it back to the Prophet.
So again, this is how the Quran works. God said this book is an example for everything. You find the example and then you place it back into the situation that you're in. And then there's an answer for you. Because this is how the Quran works. This is why it's an example for everything. So I stated to him an example and I wanted to apply it back to the Prophet. But they just don't give you a chance. There's no thought process behind what they're doing or saying.
So the Quran,
they're scared.
The Quran is applying the objective reasoning of what we need, the objective of reality of what we need to do as a community. But then the book is very subjective to what you want to do in your life in the bounds of God. So if you want to be a doctor, you take what you learn from the book and you apply it in your life, in your field. If you want to be a ruler, you have your rules and delegations. That's the subjective nature of the Risale. Not everyone's going to have the same destiny in life.
The way you apply the message is subjective. The message itself is not subjective. Hold on.
You see, he understood part of what I'm saying, but he didn't understand why I'm saying it. Okay, he didn't let me finish. But the important part is he did be quiet and he did listen. So there are things that you have to understand if you are conscious of the Day of Judgment. The whole purpose there was for me to give him some evidence that I am not crazy or saying crazy things, and I'm giving him a warning at the same time. He right there got his warning. God allowed him to sit down and to hear it. And he got the proof. In the Quran, that's called the bayina. He got his bayina, that there is some information that is being said to him. And then when you get the bayina, when someone's giving you a bayina, it's either going to wake you up or you're going to now really grasp into what you're saying and you're going to really hate what's going to be said. This is how the Quran proves what a bayina is. Prophet Muhammad gave a bayina to a whole group of people, and it's the same bayina as being used to everybody. So if you use that part of the clarification to somebody and they're allowed to hear it, this is going to be used against them on the Day of Judgment. And at that point, I seen that he listened, he took it, he even agreed. And now I said, okay, let's calm down because he's saying what I'm saying. We found some common ground. But then let's see how he acts.
Hold on, guys. Hold on 1 second. The way you apply the message is subjective. The message itself is not subjective. The message itself is from God. If you are a Muslim, you'd know that. Right? Very simple. If you knew the message is from God. If you are a Muslim,
we agree on that point. Maybe the wording.
If it's from God, something from God subjective.
Maybe the word, yes, the book from God is subjective to.
What? What the hell, dude? Wait a minute. Isn't the Risala the entire message of the Quran?
Oh, yeah,
if he wants to...
Look, guys, look.
Look, 52 interrupts, 27 interrupts, a total of 11 insults, and 6 lies. That's what they did. If you want to review the tape and see, and yet to this time, all of this 20 minutes that have passed in this debate or discussion or whatever it is, or berating me, they haven't quoted a single verse of the Quran. These are the people who call to this religion that they love so much, that makes them be like this, that makes them just so corrupted inside, and they call me the disbeliever. When I'm talking about the book of God, they want to talk about everything else, and then they end by saying, oh, this guy's a kafir, which means that I'm going to hell in their books. But they don't know that God in the Quran said, Allah, yukaffiru anhum sayyi'atihim. So that he will reject my sins off me. So the word is not always in the context that they like to push to each other. So they follow the whims and the desires of what their scholars say, what these words mean. But in reality, you know what? Kafart anhum.
This is the same nonsense you get with kuffar every time. With particular hadith rejectors in particular, these kuffar, not just in general kuffar.
And that was the end of it for there. I don't care what he's going to say after, because that's all they did was just talk at me. But as you could see, this is what we have to deal with when someone is trying to tell them what your problem is. They're so good at telling the Christians and atheists and everyone in the world and Jews about how they have problems. And they're so quick to take the specks out of their brother's eyes, as they say, but they can't remove the log because they want to call me a Christian missionary. But you know what? I find the same things that they say about the gospel and what's wrong with the gospel inside their hadith. But what happens at the end? They'll disbelieve in the gospel, which God said is clearly a book of God. They'll disbelieve in the Torah, which God clearly said in the book. And I don't follow the Torah or the gospel. I just maybe read it once in a while, just like how I read the hadith once in a while. But God said nothing about the hadith. God said that the Quran is the best hadith. This is how you go around the world. This is how you should act. This is how you should be. And look at them. This is what we deal with. This is why I will never be a Sunni again. Because people like them are filled with the religion, especially their scholars. They're the first ones to run from an engaging conversation because they know the dirt that's in the hadith. And they're not allowed to talk about it within each other. But if someone talks about it, at that point, it's the same things what the Zionists do. They're going to start calling you names and putting you down and trying to defame you because that's their tactic. There is no change. The Pharisees, these so-called scholars, all of them, they're in the same group because the Quran is an example for everything and it fits them very well. Peace be upon you.